Today is Tuesday, November 11th, 2025. Let's read this article to learn English. By reading it aloud, we could practice pronunciation, and also we could learn the rhythm of English. And also, along the way, we would have good reading and comprehension, and also we could try to pick up the words, expressions, cliches, idioms on the spot. That's quite important, right? Jesus was a psychedelic mushroom. I don't know. A controversial theory suggests. Could it reshape Christianity forever? An eccentric idea from the 1970s may rewrite everything we believe we know about the New Testament. By Elena Spivak, published October 16th, 2025. I think Jesus was a real man. He just roamed around Israel and the nearby neighborhoods to preach about love and respect to God and the proper way of living, and also probably he taught meditation, right? I believe he was from Pakistan or India, and probably he was a yogi. Nonetheless, whoever he was, I think he kind of enlightened many people living in Israel. The people who lived in Israel are both Israelites and Palestinians, and Armenians, maybe Greek, and some Romans. So it's not purely Israelites, it's mix of everything. So we could understand Palestinians and Israelites, they are of the same people, but currently they fight against each other, because they share no cultural common habits, characters, and their religions are different. So that's the problem. It's like North Korea and South Korea. In May 1970, an incendiary new book by the renowned archaeologist John Allegro hit the scene, titled The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross. The book argued through linguistic analysis of the Bible's New Testament that Jesus Christ was in fact actually a psychedelic mushroom. Essentially, Allegro tried to convey that the New Testament brims with code words for psychedelic rituals. By his logic, every godly encounter, every epiphany, every miracle in an allegory of a trip. Yeah, epiphany, right? Some kind of opening in your head, psychologically, I mean, and you get enlightened epiphany. Academics lashed their publication with swift and unforgiving criticism, but now, 55 years later, there appears to be a renewed interest in Allegro's most controversial work. In 2009, Gnostic Media Research and Publishing released a 40th anniversary edition of The Sacred Mushroom, and the book even landed on Joe Rogan's podcast 2 years ago. Researchers remain skeptical of Allegro's book and his methods, but as his work reaches a new audience, it's important to understand the linguistic pitfalls of his thesis, while also recognizing where it has potential to unlock new understanding of ancient texts. Prior to publishing his book, Allegro, also known as an expert on the Dead Sea Scrolls, a collection of nearly 1,000 ancient Semitic texts that are about 2,000 years old, Bedouin shepherds first found them in a cave along the Dead Sea's shores in 1947. Through 1956, archaeologists and other Bedouins discovered more scrolls and text fragments in 11 caves total. Today, it's understood that the Dead Sea Scrolls contain our oldest known Hebrew language biblical manuscripts, as well as other legal and liturgical Jewish texts. In the sacred mushroom, Allegro departed from this expertise and turned to the original text of the New Testament. By poring over the roots of key words in a discipline known as philology, Allegro posited that New Testament's authors used encoded language to invoke a secret fertility cult harkening back to ancient Mesopotamia. Right? Harkening back to ancient Mesopotamia. Yeah, Epiphany. The group heavily used psychedelic substances, most notably the Amanita muscaria mushroom. This is the Christ mushroom at the crux of his book. Allegro arrived at this conclusion by using Sumerian, the language of ancient Mesopotamia, as a key to understanding root words that signal the civilization's fertility cults. For him, Sumerian was almost this sort of panacea to all the linguistic challenges that scholars of Old and New Testament faced, says Geoffrey Smith, PhD, an associate professor of religious studies at the University of Texas at Austin and director of the Institute for the Study of Antiquity and Christian Origins. I think he believed that Sumerian basically just blows the whole Bible wide open. Sumerian, Allegro believed, united Semitic and Western languages, which for him created a connection between the New Testament's Greek with an Old Testament's Hebrew and Aramaic. What's more, Sumerian would have been the language of the Mesopotamian fertility cults, he argued, had continued underground after the ascension of Roman rule. Ascension. Ascend. So lifting of the Roman rule, right? Ascension. Basically, it's ascension, right? I'll look up the word, but kind of knew the ascension of Roman rule. The problem is that linguists don't think Sumerian is the language bridge that Allegro believed it to be, according to Smith. I'm not a doctor, but I think if I was out in the desert without food for 40 days, I would probably see all sorts of interesting things. A lot of his argument is based on Sumerian, and some of the reviews of the time by people who knew the language were like, that doesn't make any sense, says Matthew Goff, PhD, a professor of religion at Florida State University. They are saying, I don't think this guy knows Sumerian as much as he claims to. While his methodology was unsound, according to others, philology and linguistic experts, Allegro may have been onto something in his interrogation of psychedelics in the ancient Near East around the time of Christianity's inception. It's possible his method was wrong, but he got to the right place, Goff says. This is to say that it's worth examining what may have spurred the New Testament's authors to believe, for example, that Jesus could encounter the devil after wandering for 40 days in the desert. I'm not a doctor, but I think if I was out in the desert without food for 40 days, I would probably see all sorts of interesting things, Goff continues. As for other evidence, Allegor's approach is purely philological, so he doesn't bolster his suppositions with, say, botanical clues of drug use that coincide with Christianity's rise in the Levant. Archaeobotanical. There's ample research on the importance of psychedelics in many religious rites, but their potential role in early Judeo-Christian tradition isn't well known. It's always the Amazon or the Hopis in the Northwest in those traditions, Goff says. Their visions, their ecstatic experiences were triggered by peyote or ayahuasca. But more evidence of hallucinogen use from the Judeo-Christian cradle and its surrounding regions has been popping up. Allegor's general intuition about the ritual use of hallucinogens across the Mediterranean and Near Eastern cultures that give rise to biblical tradition has witnessed some corroboration in recent years, says Brian Brarescu, author of The Immortality Key, which investigates whether early Christian rites included hallucinogenic communion wine. For instance, a 2023 study published in the journal Scientific Reports describes how a lack of hair from a Spanish cave demonstrates that humans from as early as 3,000 years ago may have used plant-based hallucinogens. Another paper from 2024 published in Scientific Reports found a vase with a 2nd century BCE in Egypt, from the 2nd century BCE in Egypt, with evidence of psychotropic substances. And looking at psychedelic effects on the brain, there's considerable overlap between drug-induced trips and transcendental experiences one might consider a religious encounter. Yep, there are many unbelievable stories about riding a white horse and visiting Israel in the air, right? And like turning water into wine, flying through the skies, making the crippled to rise again. Andrew Newberg, a neuroscientist and professor of integrative medicine at Thomas Jefferson University, has found that meditative and spiritual practices seem to shut down some of the cortical areas in the brain, particularly the frontal lobe and the parietal lobe, he says. If the parietal lobe goes down, then you are going to kind of lose your sense of self, because the parietal lobe is involved in our spatial representation of ourselves. Psychedelics can also affect the parietal lobe in this way. Depending on how you stimulate various structures in the lobe's network, it can create different kinds of experiences Newberg says, you can do it through drumming rituals, you can do it through meditation, you can do it through a drug. But perhaps sacred mushrooms resurgence informs us as much about the current moment as it does about ways to think about proto-Christianity. There's a conspiratorial element to this premise. Wolf says, there's something compatible about that with our contemporary culture. But Allegro certainly wasn't out of line questioning the role psychedelics may have played in Christianity's formation. It's a legitimate academic question in terms of religions of the New East of the time, Goff says. Were there rituals that were using some sort of substances? That's not a bad academic question. Lemore. Contributor is Elena Spivak. Elena Spivak is a science writer in New York City, where she lives with her tuxedo cat. The graduate of NYU SHRB, she has also written for Scientific American, Popular Science, and Popular Mechanics, Inverse, Slate, and others, Connect, LinkedIn, Twitter, Blue Sky, and website. Twitter is X, right? X. Well, basically, there's a possibility that maybe Jesus consumed psychedelic mushroom and came to conclusion that he is the son of the Father, the heavenly God. I'm not sure about what was going on with Islam, because I'm very fearful of their retaliation, retribution, and scourge on me, so I cannot comment on their Quran or their sacred religion. But when it comes to a Bible, which I know much about, there's one possibility that psychedelic mushrooms was some hallucinogenic substances were involved. We never know. But the Bible contains good verses, sometimes bad verses, sometimes terrible verses, like stoning your daughter to death or hanging your children up in the trees at the entrance of your village. I wouldn't do that, and to me it's terrible. Well, that's it. Have a great psychedelic Tuesday wherever you are, and have fun. And today's a Pepero Day. Pepero is stick cookies sold in Korea. November 11th means 4 ones, right? 1111. So those 4 ones resemble the cookies called Pepero in Korea. Many people go to the supermarket, convenience store, department stores, or on the street corners. They sell cookies on the street corners on this particular day, and you can consume and celebrate today. Thanks for reading, and thanks for your time and attention. Take care, and bye-bye.